I welcome you all to this policy session on what Euro-Mediterranean and African Partnership for Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation. This session is quite timely. It comes right after the COP28, and it seems that they have already reached a compromise agreement, which is much less than was expected, because in fact, the 1.5 target will not be achieved. But at least there is a recognition that the world is needing to transit out from fossil fuel. So our session today is about really climate change mitigation and adaptation between European Union, Mediterranean region, and Africa, which in fact, Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa are diverse, I would say, regions, of course, with diverse strategies, opportunities, and challenges. And of course, because of the disparity between the different regions, of course, we cannot expect a unique adaptation and mitigation strategy for climate change. So let me start just giving a background for example, for the European Union. European Union has been, in a way, a leader in setting the ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions over the years. And it has been in the forefront for the Green Deal. So in fact, there is an explicit push for transitioning to renewable energy sources and also enhancing energy efficiency, and while in fact implementing the European Green Deal, which makes Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So in fact, we see clearly that Europe is pushing very much globally to transit the world from fossil fuel to green energy. But also they have been very much involved in the adaptation strategies. And in fact, this would at least aim to improve the infrastructure resilience and also implementing sustainable land use practices and enhancing the disaster risk reduction measures. So I think these are all measures which have to be interconnected overall, and it is clear to me that a lot needs to be done. I think we had a meeting in the COP28 in Dubai, and clearly all of these adaptation mitigation strategies, they need a lot of funding and investment for them to become a reality. Now, if I go to the Mediterranean region, the story is a bit different. In fact, the Mediterranean region is a climate change hotspot, and this is something that has been already recognized since last year in the COP27. And in fact, the IPCC reports have confirmed this in several occasions, because the Mediterranean region, geographically, it is very close to drought, heat waves, and water scarcity and desertification. So all of this increasing, I would say, climatic challenges has been already seen, and we are living it over this, because in fact, we can see that even the extreme events, climatic events, are increasing in frequency, and this will continue to happen over time. So of course, the challenges for this region is to balance climate action with economic development and social development. And this is clearly becoming much more complex when the region is grappling into the tensions, wars, and economic difficulties. So, of course, many countries have been committed to the national determined contribution, the NDCs, which are in fact the climate action plan to cut emissions and adapt to the climate impact. So obviously every country is expected to establish an NDC, and I think this is already mainly done, and have to report on the achievements every 5 years. This year, for the first time, there has been the global stock take, and we can learn a little bit more about it from our panelists. But then again, we see that there is a lot to be done to ensure that there is this really advanced progress for climate change adaptation and mitigation. There are many institutions that are really encouraging the developments. One of them is the Union for the Mediterranean, and the Union for the Mediterranean, here we have Gramenos with us, has been really in the pushing for climate action, and we've been in the COPs really trying to advocate for the emergency situation in the Mediterranean region, and action is needed. So we cannot just delay this and really trying to move forward the transition. So it's not only really delaying it further, but again, what we hear, for example, from the compromise agreement in the COP28 and even before in the COP27, I mean, there is no really decisive global action to transit or to, I would say, phase out from fossil fuel. And even if we phase out from fossil fuel, the investment and financing needs are huge, and we need to have it. We need to have it shared globally rather than every country alone. Now, Africa is another region with its own peculiarities. There is huge vulnerability, and the impact of climate change is also important. It's hugely vulnerable to climate change, due, for example, to the dependence on agriculture, limited adaptive capacity, and also socioeconomic challenges. Yesterday, we had a keynote speech by Giovanni Ferri, and if you look at the map, it's very clear that it's all plagued with wars and with tension, and this makes really any action for adaptation and mitigation much more complex, and the costs are much higher. So I think we need global action, not only for climate action, but also for investment and financing. So with this background, this panel is trying really to discuss these matters. Of course, there are many themes that will come when we have this discussion today. It's how to balance, in fact, development and sustainability and climate action, and what is really the need for this global solidarity. Of course, we have in the COP28 reached the loss and damage fund, which in fact is reaching almost 800 million, but it's very little for the challenges and for the cost of the challenges that the climate change is posing for the vulnerable countries. Also, the issue of equity and just transition. I think ensuring that the climate action is equitable and does not disproportionately impact vulnerable community is a key concern. And I think nobody has to be left behind, but again, there is a core responsibility between the different actors, but we need to think what are the policies, how to do it in terms of operationalization, even of this, for example, the loss and damage fund. For the moment, it's not very clear how it will be funding those countries. So I would like to start at least introducing our panelists. We have Sensia El-Sidi, Director of Research and Head of the Economic Policy Unit at the Center for European Policy Studies, dialing in from Brussels. We welcome you here with us, Sensia. Thank you for being with us. Here in Barcelona, we have Nathalie Helmi. She is the Head of Environmental Economics and the Scientific Center of Monaco. Nathalie has always also been one of the authors of the IPCC report work on the Mediterranean too. So she can even tell us a bit more about, the emergency situation of the region. Gramenos Mastroianni, who is the Senior Deputy Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. He just arrived yesterday from Dubai, so very fresh from the compromise declaration that has been already, I don't know, you can tell us a bit more about it. And at my left side, Yolanda Fresnillo, who is a policy advocacy manager at Debt Justice Eurodad. So I start with Cynthia to tell us a bit more about the adaptation strategies and what the European Union is doing, and how do you see the picture, particularly after the compromise agreement that has been reached yesterday.
Thank you very much, Rim, for inviting me and for giving the possibility to share my thoughts on this topic. I have just few slides which I would like to share with you. Can you see them?
Yep.
Okay, let me go in the full screen. Okay. Let me start with few pictures and which basically link back immediately with what Rim mentioned in the introduction. I think it's now clear that we are in a situation where rising temperatures and extreme weather events are a reality. These are pictures which represent some extreme events in Europe. There is Belgium, Germany, Italy, Libya, basically with floods. Then there is fire. I don't know whether the picture comes from about Spain or it was about Morocco. And then some of you may have seen this map where which refers to July last year about the fire danger forecast. And basically you see that the danger is extreme and very extreme in basically all countries around the Mediterranean. So I think this is somehow evidence that these extreme events is not something that can happen, is something that is happening and unfortunately is likely to become even more frequent. And I think this is not imagination. This is a reality, and I think now we have quite clear instruments to somehow say that this will be the case. These two charts basically represent temperature anomalies. The one up is about global surface air temperature. And you see basically the 2023 line, which is a clear outlier. There's a clear anomaly compared basically to data which start in the 40s. So basically every year, every decade, the temperature has been growing, but 2023 is a clear anomaly. Another anomaly is on the temperature of the sea surface. And again, also here, 2023 is an anomaly. If you look at differences with previous years, this is simply huge. And basically, this second indicators, the one of the sea surface, is extremely interesting because it is somehow a sort of leading indicator of extreme temperature and storm records. And the reason is that the naturally sea and in particular oceans usually work as a buffer in terms of absorbing excess heat. And this has worked basically for decades. But in the last few years, global oceans have been heating up. And when basically the higher temperature, the sea displays a higher temperature, it means that quite a lot of energy is being transferred to the atmosphere. And basically this leads to storm records. So basically you end up in a circle whereby you have a higher temperature and higher risk of extreme storms, which basically leads to floods. So in this sense, I think we really need to be prepared for a situation where basically extreme events become more frequent. And I think we are in a situation in which governments cannot ignore. I mean, I think we should say in some cases cannot deny anymore that climate change is producing effects, because these effects have become physical and very tangible. And while it was the case that most of these effects actually were concentrated in less developed countries, and I will come back to this in a moment, and now the Mediterranean, in particular, really the Mediterranean has been really the theater of a growing number of extreme events. I think that in Spain, some regions in the south, Andalusia, there are water restrictions now in December. Can you imagine what is going to be water demand in basically in July or August? So the situation has become really very tangible. So the problems related to climate change have become really very tangible. And this, they have very high costs because they have costs which are lives. So people have been dying. And of course, a monetary cost. And also, I think what is important, and maybe this is what will make governments take some action, is that political pressure will increase because the cost of climate change are really felt by citizens and the electorate. Now, what can be done? And this is where it becomes, if you want, a bit more complicated. I mean, of course, one issue is the resources, is money, because you need to intervene, you need to compensate, you need to reconstruct, you need to build new infrastructure, but also you need to be efficient. Government efficiency is not only about the money, it's government efficiency becomes extremely important. And the second thing is that we really need to start to think in a way that if we cannot prevent anymore those events, or the capacity to prevent such events has been declining, we need to be able to stand them. And this is basically may actually result in a new balance between mitigation and adaptation policies. Now, in global fora, and but maybe you can actually confirm or maybe even say that what I'm saying is not true. But at least from the outside, in the global fora, the main debate is about mitigation. And so basically addressing the root causes of the problem rather than dealing with the effects like the impact of extreme events. And the main logic here is that adaptation mitigation is really providing a public good. So if you manage to avoid these events and you have climate stability, let's call it like this, you have widespread benefits, which of course require cooperation as really in the idea of the public good. And this basically consists essentially on replacing fossil fuels, moving towards electric options, energy efficiency, protecting a forest. And I think that the declaration of the COP28, so this deal of basically transitioning away from fossil fuel, I think is really the clear example. By contrast, extreme events and the idea of moving towards adaptation, in a sense, from a policy point of view, is very different. Because unlike mitigation, adaptation is very local. So extreme events tend to be geographically limited. If you think of fires, if you think of floods, so it becomes a local concern. And this, I think, it's why what I was saying earlier, until recently, this climate, the need for adaptation in response to extreme events, it was mostly an issue in developing countries, which had to deal with it. But now the situation is changing, because as temperature increases, the issue basically goes north. That is the reality of where we are now. Now, in terms of adaptation policies, the approach is very different because adaptation policy is essentially about infrastructure. I mean, water management, it becomes clear and a clear necessity. Protection of the ecosystem, but also urban planning. I mean, even if if you go more north, and this is just to give you an extreme example, think of Paris. If in Paris temperature in summer goes to 45 degrees, the city will be unlivable. It's not by chance that in the city they are thinking of building big green areas, because when the temperature is higher, goes higher, the only thing that you can do in order to live in such an environment is actually to have a concentration of green spaces, basically trees. So this requires really forward-looking thinking and action at local level. Now, more on the policy perspective, and I will conclude with this slide, and then I will wrap up. I think what is really needed, and we are not there yet, is what is called green budgeting and climate risk assessment in the way governments formulated policies and they define their budgets. So basically, it is this idea that climate-related criteria should be incorporated in the way governments they define their budgets. So investment in energy, but also climate adaptation and infrastructure. And next to it, also climate risk assessment. So this is clearly quite difficult, but in a situation where, for instance, that sustainability becomes more and more important, especially in the European debate, but not only, the idea of incorporating climate risks becomes of crucial importance. And this is an area where little progress has been done. So there is an increasing acknowledgement of the problem, but in fact, when it comes to climate, the issue is very often left to the local level or brought to the higher level, the supranational level. And this probably needs to be changed. So let me now conclude. So I think that as the impact of climate change accelerates and it really becomes material, there is a need to rethink policy interventions, because there will be more calls for policy intervention. And I think we need to be prepared for adaptation becoming even more prominent, because there is an urgency element and the need to respond to urgency of citizens. And I think this is going to pose challenges to countries which have limited fiscal space, which is basically an issue of all around the Mediterranean, North and South Shore. And then a final point, really for reflection, think of a climate fund, because I think one of the questions is, should we think of a common climate fund? And I think if you look from a pure economic point of view, a climate fund would make sense for mitigation because of the externality and the provision of the public goods that we discussed earlier on, and not necessarily for adaptation. However, I think that we should not underestimate the fact that the local dimension of adaptation measure or the lack of adaptation measure can actually lead to bigger cost. Think of forced displacement. And the fact that if you leave areas which have issues of lack of water becomes desertify, so the issue of climate change will just increase rather than being contained. And then last but not least, something that Rim referred to, the issue of solidarity. And I think cross-regional and cross-country solidarity will be increasingly important, not least to deal with the immediate impacts of catastrophic climate events. I will stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. This was a very good overview. And on what you proposed, I think it has a rationale, because in fact, if you look at the physical risks when the extreme events were rare, every, say, 100 years you have an extreme event, then the insurance and reinsurance market would intervene. In September, I was in a meeting in Frankfurt where the insurance and reinsurance market is exiting from extreme events. And I think the rationale of a catastrophic disaster fund per country, it's becoming a priority, at least to prepare in case there is an extreme event. So the pay out for the vulnerable communities or whoever has been impacted by the climate event would be easier to handle. And as you said, this is part of adaptation strategies. And I agree with you, there is a new balance to be debated or to be discussed between mitigation and adaptation. I think before the developing and more vulnerable countries, they were talking about adaptation, and the developed countries are talking about mitigation. And nowadays, I think everybody has to talk first adaptation and maybe at the same time mitigation. But since, I mean, there is as you mentioned, I mean, there is no a green budgeting and a climate risk assessment from a fiscal standpoint, then I do not know how to deal with it. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Nathalie with the focus on the Mediterranean region. Maybe she can give us her assessment about the same topic. Please, Nathalie.
Thank you, Rim. I think Cynthia really said a lot already, so I will repeat maybe some of what she said. In fact, the Mediterranean Sea is a closed basin, and it is surrounded by countries with different degrees of development. In the north of the Mediterranean, we have the European countries, which are more developed, and in the south of the Mediterranean, we have the developing countries, meaning North Africa or the Middle East. And also the Mediterranean Sea is considered as a hotspot of biodiversity. And this is why it is interesting to study the impact of climate change on the people and the ecosystems in the Mediterranean. So if we look at the extreme events from IPCC reports, we consider that they are increasing, and not only in the Mediterranean, but everywhere in the world. We have heavy rainfalls and floods. We have drought, extreme heat, more frequent fire, and this will have an impact also on the sea, because the sea is acidifying, it's warming and deoxygenating, meaning that the fish cannot breathe. And this is, like Cynthia said, it is important because the ocean is taking the heat from the atmosphere. 80% of the heat is already taken by the ocean and the sea. So it is really something important because now the ocean cannot play his role. And about the coastal impact of climate change, we have the sea level rise. The sea level rise is due to different causes. One is the ice melting in the Arctic, in Antarctica, and the glaciers are retreating. But also because of warming, the ocean are expanding, and this will cause a sea level rise, and it will cause coastal erosion as well. So it is important from an economic point of view because the beaches are retreating as well, and meaning that less tourism will come. And this will impact also the ports and the infrastructure of those ports. And it is important from an economic point of view for trade, because 80% of the trade is done by maritime transportation. And so this is why I'm going to the impact of climate change on the economy and the society. I spoke about tourism. 33% of the world tourism is in the Mediterranean. So if the tourism decreases in the Mediterranean, it's less revenue, especially for the countries of the south, meaning the less developed countries and the most vulnerable to climate change. The fisheries are also impacted. I have a paper published on this. And it is done with the natural scientists, and we work together to study a vulnerability index. And we see that the fish are going upward. And we studied the commercial fishes, and meaning that the countries of the south will lose livelihood, and they will lose the fish for the subsistence, their protein intake. So it will be a lot, not only revenue, but also for their well-being. And I told about trade and maritime transportation. Cynthia mentioned migration. Migration is due to different reasons, because it can be environmental, it can be political and economic, but it is also caused by conflicts, and those conflicts are due to water management if they are not well done, and to changes in the fish distribution, because the fishermen cannot fish the fish, and they have conflicts because they want to fish more or further, and this will cause problems. And finally, we can say that the main problem in the Mediterranean is climate justice. The countries of the north have polluted more. They created the problem. They emitted more CO2 and they developed. And the countries of the south, they are more vulnerable to climate change and they cause less CO2 emissions. So what they want now is more equity, more inclusion, more justice. And what they require is a climate resilient development. So to include the climate problem in their development, but to continue to develop. I will stop here.
Thank you, Nathalie, for emphasizing the socioeconomic impacts of the climate change in the Mediterranean. I think the picture gets gloomier and gloomier from yesterday to today. I mean, I don't know what to say in this respect, but clearly, listening to Cynthia and listening to Nathalie, at least from your assessment, Cynthia, there is European Union who can eventually do something for Europe in terms of adaptation, because clearly this is not only touching Mediterranean only or Europe only. It's really a global. It's really all the world. It's being impacted by the climate change and global warming. And listening to or reading the compromise agreement transition or transitioning out of fossil fuel, it's not really for me an act to phase out from fossil fuel. It's really semantic. So I think we will be making the transition for probably another 100 or 200 or maybe even more years. Not sure about this. So what to do? I mean, of course, in the European Union is really taking the lead with the Green Deal, and there are actions there. Of course, you have the internal disagreement or agreement in many aspects. But then in the Mediterranean, who is going to act? And I go and give the floor to Gramenos. Gramenos, you are at the head of the Union for the Mediterranean and on the climate action. What is your view about this?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would say this. Let me just stress a concept, because probably as an inertia. Normally, they say that the danger is extreme events, but this is not the real problem. The real problem with climate change is that not that there are extreme events, but that events are randomized. Our economies are structured on predictable natural cycles. But so much energy accumulated in the atmosphere makes it oscillate not only between extremes, but above all, when this happens is not predictable anymore, even if it's not extreme, but you don't know anymore when it rains. You don't know anymore when it snows. It just destabilizes the whole economic and societal construction. So this is the real problem. I would start from your words. We have the climate crisis, and then we have the war, and then we have a problem of lack of integration and injustice. And this gives the impression that we have a series of different problems that makes But I would like to go to the basics. You quoted climate justice. The problem, we don't need to multiply the different actions because there is an equivalence which is very strong, and it is the real meaning of climate justice. Whenever you reshape economy and society according to the potentials of nature, you necessarily build justice, and justice in turn creates the basis for peace. So we need to do the same thing that will solve the three aspects. To give you an example, with the Ukrainian conflict, we discovered that renewables is not only good for decarbonizing, but it is above all good because it gives sovereignty. Whatever kind of economic activity you run according to the natural potential of the territories is fair. Those who don't have the sun have the wind. It's only when you go into looking for resources that Mother Earth has decided, for instance, to put underground, that you have those polarization concentration. Only a few big guys can go for oil or for uranium. So, but the Mediterranean case is a paradigm of all this, and this paradigm extends, to our relationship with Africa. Really, if we do the right thing to tackle climate change, actually we solve justice and we also solve peace. Let's start with one very basic notion. The European Union has chosen the Green Deal, very advanced. But if it was conceived only as the ivory tower of perfection, look at us, we set an example, we would induce so much instability outside, for instance, with carbon taxations and things like that, that we would have so many imported costs that in the end, we would have not enough money to make the Green Deal. In the Mediterranean, something is happening, which is quite encouraging with all the dangers that have been described. That is that science told us one thing: we are a climate hotspot, but also told us that in this very unfair, asymmetric area, there are rich and poor, but no one, not even the richest, have enough means to face a crisis of this space and this magnitude. But if we put together all those things that made us even have disputes in the past because made us different, we end up having a bigger basket of available solutions. And we should stop making the difference, and I'll show you why. For instance, we should stop making the difference between mitigation and adaptation. It is now proven that any adaptation measure that really works implies strong mitigation. See the difference for salinization between a concrete wall, which stops the salt but emits a huge amount of carbon dioxide, and mangroves, and the other way around. But anyway, this is so we are recognizing in the Mediterranean that we need each other. European Union wants to decarbonize by 2050. It is quantitatively impossible without relying on the solar potential of the South. In turn, the solar potential of the South cannot develop if it only relied on local markets. There would not be enough finance, so we need to integrate. The same is true in agriculture and forestry. Cooperation is increasing. Why? Because of the phytogenetic heritage of the South. I mean, the plants, the species which are vital and commercial now in the South will be the ones that can save South European agriculture in just a few times. It is true in so-called technology transfer that we should stop calling technology transfer because it looks like there are some very rich and smart guys who can teach the rest of the world. In 15 years' time, the climate of Southern Europe will be a climate that we don't know how to manage, but that on the South Shore, they have been experiencing during 5,000 years. And you might think it is abstract. Then take a look at the sector of wine and vine. It is a sector in which species, what the French call les cépages, are migrating very fast. We will soon be talking about wine produced in Denmark. The territory goes north very fast, but the know-how is still in France, Spain, and so we need to integrate. Except that, imagine a place where just to tackle climate change, we decide to integrate energy systems. And it's happening, integrate food production, food security, agriculture, and this kind of things. Then it has some macroeconomic consequences. It means that all these differences in income that make this region very dangerous, submitted to climate change, will start to rebalance. In turn, it will mean that there's going to be a circulation of people. Of course, climate change on the Mediterranean is going to make people move. But one thing is having them move from desperation that puts them in the hands of criminality. Another thing is moving because we have to build a common infrastructure, a common culture, common studies, and then it's another. So if we do the right thing to tackle climate change, we necessarily build a more balanced economy, which in turn will correct the demographic divergence, which in turn will end up solving the very one thing that we never managed to solve in the Mediterranean, a sea of great civilizations, but which has never been a sea of peace. So we are so scared because we have to solve conflicts, we have to solve climate change, we have to solve injustice, we have to solve between mitigation and adaptation. Actually, if we do one single thing, which is recognize that justice is the engine, then we solve the issue. And to this, I mean, we think about many technical solutions, but the real solution to climate change is justice. We don't need, you know, those kind of strange architecture through which you have to finance. Even people at the COP, my colleagues, are losing the big picture. They're concentrating on this on this little thing. We will make the fund of 1 billion, not of the 2 billion. It's just enough. If we build justice, economy structurally resynchronizes on the ecosystem, and with one action, we solve 4, 5, 6, 700 problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Gramenos. Yes, I think justice is, as you said, is the engine to find all the solutions. But do you think this global economic order is just to allow us to implement justice to solve all these challenges that the humanity is facing?
That's right. We are where we are exactly because the system is not just. I mean, we are destroying nature, not because we are developing, but because we are developing in an unfair way. We're destroying the planet because we are so scared to be 9.5 billion people in a moment in which we produce calories to feed 12 billion people, except that we produce and distribute them in a way that creates 1.5 billion obese people in place of 840 million people who are, this is what destroys the, so on one hand, there is an inertia to this model because it made some people very rich and powerful and they don't want to live it. On the other hand, but you're more the professional that I'm observing something which is interesting because the real owner of economy, of government, of us all, which is finance, is shifting towards the idea that sustainable is convenient. As a byproduct, it also saves the world, but it's convenient. So this is the one thing that encourages me. But still, I mean, the old system, can I claim Chatham House rules? Otherwise, I will never, ever be admitted to a COP again. What I'm going to say in the next minute will not be repeated. I mean, if we look at the COP, it's all right, but I mean, I think they will accept. If you look at the COP that we have just watched, and you take one step back, it is a case for psychopathologists. The region where it took place is being forecasted not by Greenpeace or Greta, but by the Max Planck Institute to be uninhabitable in 20 years in a 2 degrees scenario. So they are making investments that cannot come back in 20 years. And they were saying, we want to be inhabitable. We want to be inhabitable, uninhabitable. So will economy go in that direction? I don't know. I think it's more to the psychiatrist to decide. But at least the real deciding force of economy, which is finance, is starting to focus that in the medium long term, it's better to be prudent and go back to justice.
Thank you, Gramenos. It makes us to think, and this is a good introduction also to Yolanda. Yolanda, she's from the debt justice from Eurodad. If we look at the world, it's over-indebting. And then if we look south, it's even more indebted. And then many countries are defaulting. And this means that they cannot even think about greening their budget because they won't have the means not even to deal with their own short-term priorities. So what do you think?
That I agree that the justice is the key. I think it's a very important point, but it's very difficult. It's indeed very, very difficult. I was going to start with the need to acknowledge Europe's responsibility in the problem, because I think that is the point to start for us when we think about climate justice. Is what we have a responsibility because of our emissions into the atmosphere, but also because of our responsibility towards the global South, because of colonialism, because of the unfair economic relations for many, not just decades, but centuries. And think it's not just to acknowledge that responsibility by saying, oh yeah, we have a common but differentiated responsibilities principles, and therefore we follow this, but by taking action on that. Taking action means providing the climate finance that they have to provide, not because of being generous, but because of it's Europe's responsibility to do that, but also by implementing the mitigation measures that the world needs. And in this sense, I think it's important to highlight that we need to go beyond the energy transition. We need to change the system. We need to change the modes of production, consumption, distribution. It was Natalie who mentioned tourism, and we are in a region, not just a country, that depends too much on tourism, and we know it's going to change. We know it's going to change. What are we waiting for? Really thinking of how to diversify our economies towards a model that is more resilient, not only to climate impacts, but to those dynamics that we already know that will happen, and that will build a more fair economy, a more just economy, because we'll also rely more on our own resources. So we will build sovereignty, not just energy, but food sovereignty, industry sovereignty, pharmacy sovereignty. And I think we have an opportunity there, but the focus is so much on the energy transition, only on the energy transition, that sometimes I fear we're losing focus. I went to this is an anecdote, but I went to a documentary premiere a couple of weeks ago about the impacts of lithium in Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. We're not seeing that. Then it's not a just transition. If we're just relying on extracting resources from the global South to comply with our commitments, but not really thinking of a justice approach, then we're not doing the job right. And from the finance perspective, I work on sovereign debt issues. Without looking at the debt issue, this climate justice is not possible. At this point, at this moment, countries in I think the whole of the Euro-Mediterranean area, but particularly in the global South, countries like Egypt or Tunisia, Lebanon for sure, and then countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's impossible that they invest in the necessary adaptation and mitigation not just projects, but development that they need to invest with the levels of sovereign debt, both domestic, but particularly external debt that they have. We have described what we call the vicious circle between debt and climate, where countries are getting more indebted because of climate, because of the climate impacts, because of not having grant-based or sufficient grant-based climate finance. 70% of climate finance is delivered in the form of loans. We did a little research on small island developing states, looking at what happened after a hurricane, an extreme event. In all of the cases, obviously, debt increased in the following 3 years after the event. Climate vulnerable countries are paying their debt more expensive because markets see the risk in there. So they are paying higher interest rates in a scenario of already very high interest rates. And then countries with high debts don't have the fiscal space to invest in climate action in general, don't have the fiscal space to react to climate extreme events, and have to rely on fossil fuel export and or raw products export, minerals, impacting their environment, increasing deforestation, increasing desertification, because that's what they have. And that's what the institutions like the IMF are telling them to do, is increase your gas exports, increase your oil exports in order to pay the debt back. I'm not making this up. In the case of Suriname, they just reached a deal with the private creditors to reschedule a little bit their debt with them. And the deal includes a clause saying that they have to explore a new oil basin, and when they get the revenue, part of that revenue from that basin is going to go back to the creditors. So it's literally linked to fossil fuel exploitation. And then looking at what just happened in COP28, we started working on the links between debt and climate around 2019. And we were seeing that the COPs weren't actually looking at it, and we were raising these issues, like we need to also to look at this issue. And I have to say that this year we have seen that, not in the official negotiations, but we have seen many actors putting the debt problem on the table, on side events, on announcements, on several debates that happened also at COP. I couldn't be there, but was being told. The problem is that we don't have a functioning system, debt architecture, to deal with the problem. So what is put on the table are partial solutions, like debt swaps. We just published a paper on debt swaps. Debt swaps are not efficient to deal with debt crisis, and history has told us that. They can be efficient to free up some money for climate investment, for instance, or for conservation investment, but they have to be well designed. And we highlight in that report some of the flaws that we are seeing in debt swaps that are being promoted these days. There's a lot of focus on environmental, well, ESG finance, the sustainable finance, greening the market. And we also see many flaws in that market. Even the own market is saying, well, some of things are not working. There was this article in the Financial Times not long ago saying ESG is beyond redemption, because taxonomy, except for the European Union, is not regulated, is not fixed, because there is no oversight of what's happening with the money, because there is no real commitment in blue bonds or green bonds to really invest that money in green investments or blue investments. In the recent debt for nature swaps with blue bonds, even ICMA, which is one of these institutions from the market, said, this is not a blue bond, because 99% of the resources are going to pay back existing debts. It's only a very small portion of the money going to conservation. You cannot call this a blue bond. We need, if we are going to promote sustainable finance, we need to get it right. We have been calling for many years for what we call responsible lending and borrowing principles. The UN has a charter on responsible lending and borrowing. No one looks at it, no one pays attention, but we think it's the right way. It's not just about saying it's green, it's about fixing rules that makes the finance compliant with what should be green, to simplify a lot. And then the thing that's missing from the COP discussions is the need for debt-free finance for global south countries. I think that this is, for me, saying that we are compliant with common but differentiated responsibilities and then lending and getting the money back with interest are two different things. Debt can be a business, and what we're doing today is a business. It's not solidarity. It's not making up to our responsibilities. I'm going to finish by something that just happened a few weeks ago. Only last week, because someone mentioned the new Green Deal in Europe and how this is a step forward, and I think also the step forward of issuing debt, common debt in the European Union it has been proved a good step forward. Well, some African countries are discussing and have just announced that they want to do something similar on their own, not with the World Bank, not with institutions. Like they have formed what they call the Borrowers Club for Common Leveraging Union of Borrowers. And they wanna, I think the name is not very good, but they are talking about it, about issuing joint bonds, probably with credit enhancements and guarantees from others, to be able to access concessional, I don't know, accessible finance. The issue of debt has to be considered, because otherwise all this is just going to build on a mountain that is going to explode like it exploded in the past as a full-blown debt crisis. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Yolanda. I think you exposed a major problem that we are, many countries in the developing regions are facing, which is the increasing debt. But beyond this, the use of debt. How are you sure that this debt is even going to, the priorities? Because sometimes, they can issue debt and then it goes to whichever use. First, there is very little transparency of debt, use of debt, particularly with private borrowers and also with public, with lenders, private and public lenders. But then at the same time, what is important is to ensure that there is accountability there for citizens. So you can know where these funds that have been borrowed are going. The second point is you put the focus on is the contradiction of the treatment of the IMF and also the World Bank. And this brings a point on the reforms, the global reforms for financial architecture, because I think we are still thinking, and this is the same in the private financial sector and system too, because they are thinking with the old mentality for complete new challenges. And I do not think that they even think that, for example, the financial sector on the private side, they have any responsibility to contribute to all of this climate finance. For them, this is not something for them, it's for the governments to do. And they are simply an industry that is making money on the transaction between deposit and credit, so savings and credit and investment. So there is a rhetoric on one hand, and there is a reality on the other hand, and the rhetoric is not aligning to the reality on the ground. So So what I expect as an economist is that whenever you have the extreme events, which will be happening, I mean, of course, uncertainty and predictability, they will happen. And then there will be huge destruction of value, which have been accumulated in the past. So this destruction of value will have implication on of course, on the balance sheet of all these institutions, because they would be losing. And then we have not even thought about the implication or the interconnection between climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And I go back to Cynthia, and there has been a very, again, I repeat this, a statement by a board member of the ECB mentioning that the loss of biodiversity has immense implications on the balance sheet of the financial players. And they are not even looking at it in terms of financial stability standpoint. So I have the impression that we are all debating, I mean, about the same. And at the point in time, we are all facing this contradiction. Yes, we would like to have justice, but then what does it mean in practice? And who is going to be, at least, leading the way, or coordinating the way, or collaborating for this justice? Yes, there has been the creation of this global South terminology, which up to now, I would like to understand what it means in practice. What is the global South? Is it really the fragmentation between the global North and the global South, just to say that, one is co-responsible or responsible of the other one? So we are still fragmenting our response based on a global challenge. So I just want to ask one question to Cynthia. I mean, you are in Brussels, and Europe has been very much proactive in all this debate of responding to the climate change, and also Europe also has been responding to the pandemic in a quite an unusual, but there has been solidarity there on the response. Do you see really a possibility for the European Union to respond to these climatic challenges for the European Union? That's my first question. And then a role of the European Union for the Mediterranean and Africa, at least. I'm not going to call them Global South or part of the Global South. I'm going to call them Mediterranean Africa. Why? Because there has been decades and decades of collaboration and cooperation, economic, political, and cultural, between Europe, the Mediterranean, and Africa. Now, the stocktake can be under expectation, but then there has been years and years, of cooperation. So how do you see this from your side?
Thank you, Rim, for the question. If you allow me, I would like to have an observation actually on what it was said also by other speakers, and it is about the exiting fossil fuels, and it's about raw material, access to raw material, where to find them. And then I'll get back to your question, which I think is very pertinent. I'm afraid I'm a bit negative, pessimistic, but let me first make, if you want, a bit of an unpleasant observation. So I'm actually, as a personal belief, very much in favor of the green transition and moving towards a different system. But I think we also need to face one, I would say, unpleasant reality. I mean, if you think of when we had the start of the war in Ukraine, and basically we lost access to the Russian gas. I think somehow this was an excellent experiment to see whether we are ready to exit fossil fuel. And we are not. I mean, everyone was in panic because basically some countries risk not to have access to gas, and households being without heating. I think this is the reality. I mean, of course, we want to move away from fossil fuels, but we are not there yet. I think that the crucial point is how to manage the transition. This is a transition which takes time, hopefully as short as possible, but we are not there yet to get out of fossil fuels. because renewables are not providing a sufficient supply because there are still limitations on the continuity of the supply that renewable can offer. The other thing is that if we move towards electricity as a main source, then we need to think of having a different system, because what we have today is unable to actually doesn't have enough capacity basically to satisfy the entire demand. So again, don't take me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not the way forward, but I think we need to be quite realistic in understanding what are the limitations and actually what needs to be done in order to overcome the limitations. And for me, a similar talk is for basically access to some critical raw material and the issue of mining. Now, if you want to have a digital transition, if you want to have green transition, you need to have access to raw materials. Now, most of the raw materials come from China. Now we have quite a good understanding of where these materials are located, mostly in China, but underground in other places. Now the question is, do we want to reduce the demand and we don't want anyone to mine further? And then basically we are stuck with the transition. Again, we need to be very realistic about where we stand and what alternative solutions we have. So again, don't take me wrong about what is the desirability, but I think we need to be very realistic about the constraints and the tough choices that we have to make today in order to move towards certain objectives. Now,
Cynthia, I want to add one point. So what you're saying is, okay, to be realistic, we need to face a much higher adaptation cost.
So for me, the question, I mean, if you think of, I think it's even beyond adaptation, because if you think of, I think Yolanda mentioned the issue, for instance, of mining. So now that there is a very high demand for certain critical raw materials, most of them come from China. We know that China may decide at some point say that I'm not exporting this to you anymore because I want to keep it for myself and I want to introduce export control. Now, we know that, for instance, Chile and other countries have these kind of materials underground. There may be an interest in mining. We know that mining is environmentally, has environmental consequences for the environment, but also for society living around. So we also know that actually we have some lithium, for instance, in France or even in Sweden. There is a question about whether we should start mining within Europe in order to secure access to those materials which are key for technology. I mean, we know that for chips and for other technology, we need to have access to this raw material. So we are going to be faced with these questions. So are we going to impose a certain environmental cost and societal cost to countries outside Europe? Are we ready to accept those costs in Europe, in some countries? I mean, we also have a very tough regulatory environment. So because basically Europe has been trying to exit mining. So it is going to be changed in order to have less reliance on other countries and to achieve more sovereignty, or let's say strategic autonomy, how it is called. So I think these are quite important questions about basically what is needed in order to ensure development and the transition in this case, and what is the price to pay for this. Now, on the point, and on this, I'm happy and would be pleased actually to hear what the other people in the panel think about. The second point about the role of Europe and whether there is actually readiness to maybe to consider to put together a fund or even maybe common borrowing for climate issues. I'm quite negative about it. I mean, you know, that will be elections. For me, there are two things. One is the current situation. Now there is quite a lot of money which have been distributed to countries through the Next Generation EU. And one of the key targets is also green transition. So countries have the possibility actually to invest in new technologies and new ways to foster the green transition. The second point is that, okay, what comes next? I mean, we will have European elections. And so the question is, will the Green Deal remain, if you want, the key growth strategy for Europe after 2024? And there, I think it depends on the outcome of the elections. My fear is that we will be going back to a debate where competitiveness, global competitiveness, is the leitmotif instead of greening the economy. That's a bit my concern. I hope to be wrong, because it would be a step back. But if you look at the political landscape across the member states, it's not necessarily very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Gramenos, Union for the Mediterranean. What do you think institutions like this can do, or maybe more cooperation at the regional level, but perhaps with other institutions that can take certain responsibilities, or maybe your views about global, I mean, global economic reforms, or maybe changing the paradigm? I don't know. What is your view?
No, we'll talk about cooperation. Cooperation is actually going very fast, but it's not the Union for the Mediterranean, nor even, I mean, we can facilitate, we are facilitating. The European Union can play, of course, a larger role, etc. But what is happening is that real economy is recognizing this need of integration for green. I'll give you just a figure. Until 4 years ago, there were 4, maybe 6 cables to bring electricity based on renewables production to the north that were being studied. Today, there are more than 250, and states are already elbowing to say, I'm the distribution hub, I'm the distribution hub. So something is happening. This is something, things like that are similar. Concerning, lithium batteries and things like that, sorry, it's not because I'm specifically Catholic, but I would like to quote the Laudato Si encyclical, where the Pope warns us about the so-called technocratic paradigm. It's not with that we're going to solve this thing. We will solve it on the demand side by reshaping our priorities and values. Once we realize that having 24 t-shirts that we use only one time is like, completely neglecting the marginal utility curve and suiciding our quality of life, we will solve it. If we stay the way we are, there's no technology in the world that has so low impact that will not cause problems that in turn will cause a vicious cycle. I mean, even if that Indian invention of batteries based on salt really worked well, and then we will still be producing a huge amount of useless cars and polluting our lives with 3 smartphones and 25 t-shirts. That's where we solve it. Back to quality and giving up this excess quantity. I know it sounds a little bit philosophical, but to me, it's more practicable. It's more practical than going there to imagine strange financial architecture. I've made debt swaps with this, the first debt swap ever we organized with Seychelles and things like that. Fantastic. But if you don't have people readiness, a change in values, appreciations, things like that, it's worth nothing. So it's a strange reply from someone who works for the institutions, but I think it has to come from people.
Okay, change of our behavior. I think probably this is for the next generation, but do we really have the time to face all the challenges? I do not know.
do we have we are opening a complex aspect, so I don't know what are the time constraints, because it's not an exercise of crystal sphere. But the thing is that there has been a lot of mistakes in communication, in the sense that we believed that if we informed people about what's going to happen, then automatically there would be an adaptive behavior to do the right thing. But it doesn't work like that. We know that normally 0.8% of the population incorporates in their choices the common good, be them demand choices or voting choices. The rest don't. So even if you tell people that it's the end of the world, they don't change behavior. They're guided by some. So what we need now is not to inform about climate change, but it is to market the future. Do marketing, not information. And we can do it. And there is one phenomenon that showed us very well how we can do it. The example comes from the palm oil adventure. You know, at the beginning, this small proportion of people who are concerned with the common good noticed that massive production of palm oil was harmful for some common goods, the indigenous people, the forest, and all these things. They reacted on that level, even with some fantastic things. There's a Greenpeace video that was the inspiration of Avatar, where you see an orangutan defending a tree from the caterpillar. But it changed nothing. When the discourse changed and became they forget the indigenous people, the forest, it harms you, which by the way is not true, but okay. Then you had change in market behavior, but it cannot last because people get used to threat. And so after a while, they just incorporate it and behave the same way. What is working very well is that you cannot sell sustainability because it saves the world. People are not wired to understand that, but you can sell it very well because it's a better product. And we're seeing it in the very quick expansion of certain markets. Now it's just the surface. There's consumers markets, not only. For instance, I know a guy who is doing very well selling sustainable pallets. If there is a good which does not have a final user image as the pallet. Anyway, it's happening in tourism, it's happening in food, etc. If we choose to market this part, which is the message is not make a sacrifice so you will save the world. It doesn't work, but what's good for you is good for your planet. Eat well, protect your health. This is sustainable. Travel well, make it a fashion. Then maybe we have a chance to change things in time. But we cannot have the illusion that the more we explain that we are close to the tipping point and then people do this, just doesn't work.
Thank you, Gramenos. Nathalie, do you want to add anything to it?
Yes, I completely agree that the behavior of each individual should change. I don't think transition is the right word. Maybe we should talk more about transformation. We need a very deep transformation of everything. And even if I go to the macroeconomic level, I think maybe the GDP is not the right indicator. And maybe to have something more related to our well-being, like in Bhutan, it will be to show that our well-being is more important than what we possess, what we have. And this is at individual level, but also the country level.
Thank you, Nathalie. You're saying a change of paradigm, Yolanda?
Yeah, totally agree. I think there is a need for a deep transformation. I agree that we need to market it well because threats are not working, and I think threats are already there. But I also think we need rules, and we need that. It's not only about individuals changing the way. It's a big part of the problem, but it's also about regulating what industries do, regulating what the financial markets do, regulating what mining do. I mean, the mining issue is not about whether mining or not mining, it's how to mine, how to do that. And what we are saying with lithium is that the worst practices in oil and other minerals mining are being applied into lithium mining. It's not about whether to do it or not, it's how you do it, how you treat with the communities, how you consult with the communities, what is the payback to the communities as well, and not just the environmental impact, etc. No? So for me, it's about rethinking the global rules as well, and that needs to be done at a multilateral and macro level, and that needs to happen as well. So it's the both elements, is the individual change and the consumption change, particularly in spaces like Europe, but also we need to tackle the global rules.
Okay, I think we had reached an agreement here in Barcelona. We need a full transformation. I don't know who will take care of it. I do not know. I think each one of us has to take care of his own transformation. Since you're in Brussels, you are less, I would say, optimistic than us. And I understand. So I would like to thank the panelists for this really fascinating discussion, to be continued for sure. Thank you, Gramenos, Nathalie, Yolanda, and Cynthia from Brussels. And I thank all the audience here in Barcelona and online. And now we have some lights here in São Paulo, so we're going to walk around and relax. So thank you all, and I hope to see you soon in other discussions. Our conference will continue tomorrow at
9:30, coffee, and we start at
9:30. We have the policy keynote speech and on labor market. So whoever is interested, Cynthia, if you have the time tomorrow, it would be great to have you with us also. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye.